Hello, welcome to part 4 of our Get Used to Different series that we've been doing here at Ignite. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry this video is a little bit late. Usually I'm a little bit more on top of things, but it was a busy week last week, so this one's coming a bit late, but it is still here. This week, I want to talk about this phrase that Jesus uses when he calls Simon and Andrew, where he says, I'm going to call you to be fishers of men. Now, this is an interesting phrase, probably not one that has ever been used before other than Jesus, but it relates to our discipleship, it relates to following Jesus, and I think it really connects to this idea of living a different life. So I'm just going to read the verse, and we actually read it a few weeks ago when we talked about the fact that Jesus called fishermen, among others, to be his disciples. But here's the verse again. It's Mark chapter 1, verses 16 to 18, and it says, "One day, as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them, 'Come follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people,' or be fishers of men. And they left their nets at once and followed him." So, first of all, when Jesus uses this phrase, fishers of men, the first thing we can see is that he's trying to relate to Simon and Andrew, right? He's trying to use language that they might understand, because they're fishermen. That's what they do for a living. And so when he is calling them and saying, "I'm going to make you fishers of people," he's kind of showing that, right, like they, in their life, their profession as fishermen, they are resourced, they have the right tools, they know how to do this thing of catching fish, which they obviously do for a job, to provide for themselves and their family. And so Jesus is using this language to relate to them, but we're going to see that he's implying a whole lot more with that. I don't know if any of you fish. I fish occasionally. I have some really random, weird fishing stories that I won't go into too much detail with. One time, though, I went fishing and I paid a bunch of money to get a fishing license to try and catch some salmon with my father-in-law. And my brother came along and he did not pay for the fishing license. And I used a fishing rod and didn't catch anything, and my brother somehow chased one of the salmon from the river into like a side pool and then picked it up with his bare hands. My mother-in-law was very impressed. She thought it was hilarious. I was very upset because I had paid all this money and didn't catch anything, and he didn't. So that was not a great story. There was another time when my brother and I went fishing, and then we ended up catching 30 snakes, okay? I bet you thought I was going to say fish. No, we gave up on fishing because we realized there were snakes everywhere where we were fishing, and so we ended up catching, 30 snakes, and we were pretty proud of ourselves that day. Anyways, I fished here and there. Sometimes I catch something, sometimes I don't. I have never fished for a living. I have never fished to feed my family or to make money for myself. So there's a bit of a difference there, and I suppose probably most of you have never fished professionally either, although you may have some experience. We know kind of the idea. You're using lures or bait to try and catch the fish. It's pretty simple. But in terms of being able to relate to this phrase the same way that Simon and Andrew would, maybe not. So what does this mean? Because as we are called to follow Jesus, we are called to be fishers of men. This applies to us too, not just to those guys. So what does Jesus mean? Well, here's the key difference, okay? And here's where this connects to this Get Used to Different series and how following Jesus means a different life, okay? Jesus calls us to a purpose. He calls us to a mission. It is a calling on our lives when we follow him. And I'm going to talk about this in two parts. This week I'm going to talk about this fishers of men thing, and then next week we're going to talk a little bit more about this calling that Jesus places on us to live for something more than just ourselves. Okay, because our default setting, and I'd say that most people in our world who are not followers of Jesus, and even maybe some who do, but our default setting as people is that when we don't have or realize that we have a purpose beyond ourselves, is that we just live for ourselves, right? So in this instance, Simon and Andrew fished, not probably because they wanted to, they fished to make a living, right? To make money for themselves, to provide for their families and themselves. You in our world, you get a job, or you start at school, you get an education so that you can get a job that pays you so that you can buy food and shelter and clothing and the things you need. And then if you get a really good job that pays you a lot, then you're able to buy things that you want too, a nicer car, a nicer house, whatever it is that you like. And our default setting in that, we do all those things so that we can provide for ourselves, right? It's kind of a lookout for number one society that we live in. Okay, we take care of ourselves, whatever that looks like. Jesus, when he calls us to follow him, calls us to be on a mission that is outside of ourselves. Okay, we no longer just live to take care of ourselves and to do what is best for ourselves. We are no longer just looking out for number one. Being fishers of men means that we are called to bring others onto this path of following Jesus. And it shouldn't be an obligation. It shouldn't be something that we just do because Jesus told us to do, although that should be reason enough, right? We've talked about Jesus' authority to call us and to teach us. And if he says, hey, make more disciples, that should be reason enough. But really, if we think about it, this good news of forgiveness and salvation that we find in Jesus really is that. It's good news. It's the best news. And when we realize that, as we've been talking about, that Jesus, he calls us to this life, but it's like the best life possible because he knows us and loves us. He knows what's best for us. When we realize that following Jesus leads to the best life possible, we should want other people to know about that. We should want them to know about this good news that we have discovered. We should want them to also be able to experience this best, different life that Jesus calls us to. So we share it with others so that they can experience it too. Now, Simon and Andrew they didn't know what that meant really at first. They knew how to fish for fish. They didn't really know how to fish for people, and yet Jesus calls us and he says, I'm going to show you how to do it. And so that's why we study God's word. That's why we study what Jesus says in the Bible, because he shows us how to do it. So if you're like, I want to follow Jesus, but I do not feel like I know how to fish for people, I don't really know how to share my faith, how to bring other people into this, that's okay. That's part of how we learn. That's part of why we seek to follow Jesus, because he shows us how to do it as we grow as his disciples, as we follow him. So you don't need to feel like an expert at it yet, because you aren't. I'm not. I'm learning. So are you, as we follow Jesus. But this is the key difference, you guys. This is the main point of this, is that we are no longer just living for ourselves. Jesus calls us to a purpose that is much greater than ourselves. And I think if we look around at our world, we see that just living for yourself is kind of a sad way to live. It brings people a lot of misery. They try to, use money to make themselves feel better, to get themselves nice things that only maybe temporarily are good, and then you want more and more and more. It's not a satisfying life when you just live for yourself. But when you live with a purpose that is beyond yourself, that is greater than yourself, then you find fulfillment, and that fulfillment comes through a life of following Jesus, through a life of fishing for men, of bringing others to this purpose. So I hope that encourages you. Again, if you don't feel ready, you don't feel equipped, that's what this is all about, learning to follow Jesus and growing in that. He will teach us how to do that better. Next week, we're going to talk more about this idea of living outside of just ourselves and what it means to serve other people. So thank you for tuning in again, and we will see you either in the next video or at youth the next time we get together. Thanks.